Your recording concludes.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to our Gambling Commission meeting at 1:15 p.m. We still have all the commissioners with us in person. We have Senator Conway. And Senator Holy. Representative Klova. Or Representative Rude. Doesn't look like it. So we will go ahead and get started on the debit card rules for the ATOM with Lisa McLean, the Legislative and Policy Manager.
Correct. And Sharon, just to be clear, we're taking this out of order on the agenda, correct?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna do that next. This one's in order.
Sorry, was this one in order?
Yes.
Sorry, my apologies.
No worries.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners, ex officios. They're not here. For the record, my name is Lisa McLean, Legislative and Policy Manager. Before you is tab 4 regarding debit cards. This is based on a petition received from Janice Behel from Light and Wonder in Las Vegas, who is proposing to amend WAC 2315150 to allow for the selling and redeeming of chips using debit cards. We brought this before you last month, and you reviewed and asked us to file a number of amended and new rules for further discussion. That has been done. In your packet, we have provided you with a couple of pictures from a video that the petitioner submitted to us of the debit card, of a debit card device. I think it's important to emphasize that we're talking about the device, not exactly the one manufactured by a particular individual. No additional stakeholder feedback has been received since the last meeting. And so at this meeting, we are just recommending further discussion. The earliest that the commissioners could take final action would be at the May commission meeting after the public hearing. As I mentioned, the petitioner sent us a video on April 6th, and then they submitted a PowerPoint yesterday, of which we gave you printed copies. I believe that the petitioner, Michael Vizzo and Janice Behel, are here online, and also online, if you have any questions, is our subject matter expert from the Gambling Commission, Jess Loest. So with that, I'll stop and bring it to you.
Thank you, Lisa. Do any of the commissioners have any questions? Doesn't look like it. All right, do we have any public comments at all? Online?
Is the petitioner?
Oh, is the petitioner here? Anything? We have somebody.
Michael Vizzo.
Okay. Michael, are you?
Yes, hello. This is Michael Bizzo, Senior Product Manager with Light and Wonder. So wanted to say thank you for taking the time to review this rule petition. And if you have any more questions regarding the information we provided, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Great, thank you. Do you have any questions for Michael? Right, I don't think there's any questions, Michael, but we appreciate you coming on to help us out.
My pleasure.
And All right, I don't believe there was any other public comments, so this one was for discussion only, so I believe we can move on. Did you?
I have a question for staff.
Uh-huh.
So refresh my memory, the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling provided us with some information, and they told us that they actually referenced studies that make a correlation between the speed of play and problem gambling. In other words, they told us that those studies exist. I don't think they gave us the studies, but they said they were out there. And that this rule change would result in players being able to continue to play nonstop without a break. So it actually would increase the speed of play somewhat, or maybe significantly. So I'm wondering if staff could drill down with the Evergreen Council and see if we can get some of that information from those studies.
Yes, since they didn't involve the actual device, it was more about how quickly you could play. We didn't include them in the rules packet. So if you are wanting studies in regards to speed of play, we can provide those. But it did not have the speed of play. Like, I get that there is a link to problem gambling. It didn't have anything to do with the debit cards on the machines in terms of this particular.
No, I understand,
Okay,
but
yep,
it stands to reason that having the ability to no longer get up from your chair and walk across the room to the debit machine to get more money or or go get more, however they do it, do they go get more chips? I don't know.
yeah, we'll go ahead and include all of the studies that they provided.
Okay, I'd be interested in that.
Okay, very good.
That's my main concern right now is I just want more information about how that, taking that break away affects the psychology of problem gamblers. So hopefully those studies will help.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Any additional public comment after? All right, then we will go ahead and move on, and I'm gonna now go a little out of order and go to tab 7, which is petition for discussion and possible final action for wagering limits for house banked card games. Lisa McLean, Legislative and Policy Manager.
Since we're all on rules, I'll ask your permission if I can stay up here.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so referring to tab 7, again, for the record, Lisa McLean, Legislative and Policy Manager. This is a petition that we received from Vicki Christopherson, representing Maverick Gaming, to increase the maximum single wager limit from 300 to 500 for all house bank card games, and to create a high limit room. I won't go over all of this issues. What you all decided at the January meeting was to file language that would increase the maximum wagering limit from $300 to $500 for a single wager. At the February meeting, you also instructed us to do additional research. And in March, you all deferred decision-making in order to have a chance to study some research that we provided regarding the 2008 discussion of the increased wager limit, and research that we provided you about the history of the change framework relating to commercial stimulant in law and in rule. We provided that to you. There has not been any additional comments since the March meeting. The other thing I would say is that at the February meeting, commissioners asked staff to provide rule language on problem gambling signage for consideration. It should be noted that in the RCW, it is explicitly requires signage directed at individuals with problem gambling or gambling disorders. That is that the Gambling Commission, the Horse Racing Commission, the Lottery Commission are to jointly develop problem gambling and gambling disorder informational signs. which include the toll-free hotline number. And that these signs shall be placed in the establishment of gambling licensees, horse racing licensees, and lottery retailers. As the current petition relates to wager limits, and the commissioners have a separate but related interest in detailed rules related to problem gambling signage in house bank card rooms, one option would be for the commissioners to initiate rulemaking for problem gambling signage separate from this current rules petition. The benefit of doing that would be that the separate rule related to problem gambling signage could apply to licensees other than just the house bank card rooms. So staff has offered in this package potential language for a new rule that could be used to initiate. Your options are to take final action now, to take final action. That's the first one. Second option is to take final action and direct staff to initiate separate rulemaking process related to problem gambling signage. Third is to direct staff to devise amended rule language that would include problem gambling signage, and that would require us, including to refile the notice of rulemaking. Fourth would request staff to continue to do its research, and fifth would be to withdraw the petition stating the reason for the withdrawal. I might sit down to allow other people.
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners?
Yeah, I'll make a comment, several comments. So we have reviewed a lot of information here, and for better or for worse, the petition has sort of caused us to take a deep dive into the statutes related to social card games and house bank card rooms. And taking a look at, excuse me, all of the information that's been produced, as well as the data that's been produced. I think that first, well, let me go back. I think that what we see is two arguments here, that the wager limits need to be updated to reflect current economic conditions, and that the tribal compacts have been steadily amended. And so the house bank card rooms feel like they need to have tribal parity. The tribal argument's been taken off the table previously by Commissioner Sizemore, so I'll just address the economic conditions. And I don't find the economic argument compelling. What we've seen so far is that even if we adjust for CPI, it doesn't reach the $500 limit. And there's been discussion of, this possibly causing card rooms to go under if they don't get the increased wager limit. But I note that in the table of house bank card rooms that we were provided from 99 to 2022, the number of card rooms has actually steadily declined over time and is leveled out now. But even after the wager limit was increased in 2008, the limit has declined. So really there's no correlation between the wager limit and the number of card rooms. And so with that, the economic argument just isn't there for me. Again, we don't have a good argument on CPI because the CPI adjustment would come in lower than the $500 that is being asked for. And then we also have this issue with statutory language. And that's been the deep dive that I think we've done. And it's worth addressing here because what I'm concerned about is that, this issue keeps coming up. Petitioners routinely petition for increase in the wager limits. And so I want this on the record so that it's there for future commissions, because we know this issue will come up again. Discussion of the statutory language. And so it's been proposed by the petitioners that commercial stimulant language, the commercial stimulant doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to have the primary purpose of stimulating their food and beverage business. The rub for me there has been the question of why would the legislature take this rule or take this language about having the primary purpose of stimulating the food and beverage business? Why would they take that out of the commercial stimulant legislation, but leave in language about the business having to be primarily engaged in selling food or drink. Leave that language in on RCW 9.460325, social card games, 9.460702, saying that the business has to be primarily engaged in the business of selling food and drink. And continue to have this language in other parts of the RCW about card games being social pastimes. And what's come in the materials that have been provided by commission staff is some sort of explanation as to why things are the way they are, right? So I was a history major in college. This is like what I do. I love why things are the way they are. And in the materials that have been provided by commission staff, we know that there was a gambling policy task force that was established by the legislature in '93, and the task force adopted or made recommendations to the legislature on gambling policy, one of which was that the legislature should amend the gambling code to aid the Gambling Commission in enforcing the public policy of the state and in fighting illegal gambling. These changes should include streamlining the reporting requirements for commercial stimulant operators to the extent that this can be accomplished consistently with the public policy of the state towards gaming. And so in response, the legislature passed House Bill 2382, which specifically says that in its final report to the legislature, the Task Force on Washington State Gambling Policy included a recommendation that the reporting requirements for commercial stimulant operators be streamlined. House Bill 2382 is the legislation that amended the commercial stimulant definition to take out the words incidental. So it no longer has to be incidental activity in connection with an established business. And it doesn't have to have the primary purpose of increasing food and beverage sales. So now we know, okay, well, this was taken out to quote unquote streamline the reporting requirements for food and beverage operators. And the testimony 4 says the commercial stimulant definition is very important. Washington State has 2,300 commercial stimulant operators. Each one has to document food and liquor sales versus gambling revenue. This is burdensome on both the operators and the commission. And so when you read that in connection with what is currently still on the statutes, what I believe you're left with is not a intent on the part of the legislature to increase gambling in the state of Washington, but rather an intent that that gambling in Washington, in-house bank card rooms and other social card games be just that, social card games. And we've gotten far afield of that intent in our successive increases to the wager limits in house bank card rooms. So I don't believe that it was the intent of the legislature for house bank card rooms to get up as far as $500. In fact, the original amount was only $100. And they're limited to only 15 tables in an establishment. And we see testimony from Senator Prentice in 2008 that says, I was having to reach back to the 94 statement, and that was the year after we had the 93 task force, where there had been a group that went all over the state. We went to Canada and down into Oregon. And at that time, it was all 5-table card rooms. So a card room could have 5 tables. And the decision when we came back was that then they would go to 15 tables. But the whole notion when we were talking about the criminal element, and I remember this discussion because we said big time crime is not going to be coming in when you've got these kinds of limits. They can't be big casinos, so we felt safe in doing that. So with these statements, with the way I read the RCW, with the history that I see here, it was not the intent of the legislature to have house bank card rooms become big time casinos that would have $500 wager limits. And I think that, like I said earlier, we've gone far afield of that. I think that the original intent was to have this be much smaller social card game rooms with much lower wager limits, like $100. Granted, I don't think that we would consider rolling back the wager limit, but between the economic data that's been provided and the deep dive that we've done onto the legislative history, it doesn't support an increase of the wager limit to $500. Hold on, I'm not done yet. So the overall theme of the statutory scheme at issue here is that social card games are quote unquote social pastimes. We see that in RCW 9.46.010, where these are social pastimes, which activities in social pastimes are more for amusement than for profit. And again, we see that same language or similar language in the background to HB 2382, where it says that operators' gross receipts are generated through collection for time, not through the level of wagering at the tables. State's authorization of social pastimes was solely intended for amusement rather than for profit. Based on the legislative history, house bank card rooms as they operate today have gone far afield of what the legislature intended. Social card games were intended to stimulate a business primarily engaged in food and beverage and not to supplement the food and beverage business of a casino. And we also see in testimony from the petitioners in August of 2022, petitioner said food and beverage can be upwards of 30% of our revenues in the building. Well, if food and beverage is 30%, the other 70% is wagering. So again, this is not a business that's primarily engaged in food and beverage sales. The argument for petitioner on the economic side has been that food and beverage business is not sustainable on a standalone basis without stronger gaming revenue. But it appears to me that if your food and beverage business can't sustain itself, no amount of a commercial stimulant is going to support that. Again, we're faced with this health of the industry standard. That standard was actually not compelling to the commissioners in 2008. Their statements by, at the time, Chair Birnbaum, which are the same two arguments we're hearing here, or that we've been hearing from the petitioners today. Chair Birnbaum said, the arguments we've heard from the proponents have primarily to do with two items. One has to do with the health of the industry and one has to do with tribal parity. Neither one of those arguments in my mind are compelling. It is not our job to ensure the health of the industry, and it isn't something that I wouldn't ordinarily consider whether or not to enact a rule change. Similarly, I agree with Commissioner Parker that the notion of tribal parity is not on the table for all the reasons previously articulated. So again, I think of what comes to mind to me here is an opinion that was written by Justice Gorsuch when he was on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals before he was elevated to the Supreme Court on a case that had been litigated off and on for 30 years. He started his opinion by saying, I'm beginning to understand a little bit how Sisyphus felt. We just keep rolling the rock. And so here, to prevent us from continuing to roll the rock, I am stating for the record that I don't believe it was the intent of the legislature for the house bank card rooms to have tribal parity in any sort of way. It's clear that the commercial stimulant language was amended for one small purpose, which was to streamline record keeping and not to expand gambling within the state of Washington. And not even addressing the tribal argument, because the tribal argument is off the table. It was off the table in 2008. It was off the table in 2016. It's off the table again in 2023. And finally, I'd like to address the letter that was sent by an attorney that was hired by the petitioners. In that letter, the attorney stated that the 1994 changes that were made to the definition of commercial stimulant, the attorney stated it needed to be changed so there was a clear understanding that the commercial stimulant, in this case card games, need no longer be an incidental activity or primarily there to increase food and beverage sales. I believe that this misrepresents the clearly stated reasons in the legislation for why the legislature chose to amend the definition. The record shows that it was in direct response to the 93 Task Force's recommendation, not, as Petitioners Council would have us believe, to make it so that the commercial stimulant need no longer be an incidental activity. And it also mischaracterizes the testimony offered in favor of the amendment and pulls it out of context. Definition of a commercial stimulant was important to Washington's 2,300 operators at the time because of the burden of reporting. And again, not as petitioner's counsel would have you believe, to remove the incidental language from the statute. It's furthermore entirely consistent with the legislative intent of the act that wagering limits be updated to reflect inflation and the increased cost of economic conditions. In fact, testimony was given at the time on the subject when the legislature increased what card rooms can charge in 1994. The testimony noted that the increase was necessary to, quote, keep up with inflation. But this is testimony and not the legislature's stated reason for enacting the change. The statute had nothing to do with wager limits. So with that, I would cede the floor to the rest of my commissioners and ask if you have any comments or questions to please let me know.
Anybody have any other questions or comments?
I guess I'll, if I may, I, first of all, very much appreciate, the homework that you've done. I've tried to do, my homework as well. And, I think I do concur in many of the, points that you've made. Where I might diverge is, that I believe that we have the authority to increase wager limits. And I think it is something that the past commissions have done. And I think that we continue to have that authority. So with that, and I mean, I think the other, you know, kind of definition of primarily, you know, I definitely infer that to mean that there's primarily selling food and beverage for consumption on premise. They're not selling kayaks or running a rental shop or something like that. So, so I mean, I'm convinced that we do have the authority to increase wager limits. I think your point to whether 500 is the right number or not has merit. And I mean, I just did a little bit of research, you know, based on, and this is where statistics and liars and that whole thing certainly comes into play. If in fact you started and used 2000 when the limit was 100 and then tried to determine what that would be today, it would be 175.
Mm-hmm.
If you started in 2004 when it was 200, it would be 320 today. If you use the 2009 number of 300, that would be 420 today. So, so I, you know, and I've had conversations with the petitioner in the past, and I know, you know, I didn't have a preconceived, you know, notion of where I might land or end up on at the end of this, you know, very comprehensive, I think, look back. But I do believe that at that time I said that I would, you know, I felt like a $400 or $500 limit would be could potentially be reasonable. But I wasn't, I think I probably was pretty clear that I wasn't interested in high limit, you know, like $1,000 limits or the argument that it needed to be parity with tribes. So with that, I mean, that's, I guess, just kind of a little stream of consciousness of where I'm feeling now.
Yeah. And I don't mean this as a rebuttal at all.
Mhm.
I don't disagree. We have the authority to set wager limits. And I too was willing to consider the economic data because everyone understands that inflation has been an issue and supply chain issues have been an issue. Where I have come to diverge is when you look at the legislative history and look at the economic data through the lens of the legislative history. And that's where, you know, we have gone far afield, I think, from what the legislature intended in allowing house bank card rooms. And so outside of any adjustment for CPI, I think that we need to come back and fall more in line with what we have from the legislature. And that is that these are supposed to be social pastimes that are, more for amusement than for profit. And in that regard, again, I'm not saying that we should ratchet the wager limit down at all, but I can't support an increase, any increase.
Any other comments? Commissioners?
I just have a question. I've been on the gambling commission for almost 10 years. And it was just recently that this issue was brought to my attention. I'm wondering, for staff that have been here for a long time, has this issue does it come up regularly? Has it come up through the years regularly for debate, for consideration? Has it been raised in the past? Have any of our ex officios told us that we were getting far afield from legislative intent when we've raised the limits in the past? That would be interesting to know. I mean, that the ex officios would be keeping an eye on legislative intent more than just about anything, I imagine. Do we have any record of this kind of division with regard to this issue from any other time when we've been making this rule change?
Lisa McLean's able to answer that question.
And I'm just curious, excuse me for interrupting, do we have ex officios with us here?
Didn't earlier.
None.
No.
Okay.
For the record, Lisa McLean, Legislative and Policy Manager. Might refer you to page 395 in your huge packet. That's the April commission packet, not just the separate thing. And for Commissioner Patterson, because I think you got a paper.
Thank you.
Here's a, so if we look at that, kind of see that, if we look at that, we see that, remember the house break card rooms were approved in 1997. And they spent from 1997 until 2000. The staff had rules and they developed the rules over time. So they had these different limits, and then they expanded the limits, and they found that there were problems and there was a violation here or there was a violation here. And so they tweaked a rule, and then they brought in ideas about surveillance rooms. And so there was a whole discussion over a period of time. And it wasn't until 2000 and until 2000 that they came. In April 2000, the commission agreed to the permanent rules related to this issue. Okay, and that and the commissioners seem to have been a part of that process all the way along. In fact, commissioners at commission meetings up until 2003 would review reports of house bank card rooms and would hear about a violation, or would hear about whether or not they paid their taxes, would hear about a report from the local police as to what impact the house bank card room was having. So they were very involved in this process. When the issue came up for increasing again in August 2003, there was, I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but there was a similar big debate as I think we're having here, that in the time that I've been here, much discussion. Discussion was never about tribal parity. The discussion was more about, a lot of it focused, as did in the 2008, on the expansion of gambling.
Was there discussion specifically on this topic of food and beverage?
Nope, never, not about commercial stimulant, not about tribal parity. That the argument was again put forward as, we need to be able to be competitive. But
And by being competitive, were they talking about competing with the tribes, or were they talking about being able to compete in general in a capitalistic society where prices are going up.
Some of it was in general, and there was, I remember one section in particular was about the fact that it's not, sometimes not all people have the same competitive problems because of the proximity to other card rooms or other gambling establishments. If you could, so the other issues were, if we were to consider this, would it encourage others to ask for increase in limits? And they were referring to nonprofits and fundraising individuals. And then they also, at the time, also brought up the issues of raising revenue, increasing margins, and the like. And there was no discussion as to whether or not there was one comment about, as you have raised, Commissioner Lawson, about the fact that I don't think we're here to worry about the health of the industry. But that wasn't a large part of the discussion. So as I was reading through, especially the 2003 discussion, it reminded me very much of the to and fro here, but not in the way that they were not talking about commercial stimulant, not at all. It was much more an argument about, is this an expansion of gambling, and is this a decision for others to make?
So I'm sorry, can you say that again? In 2003, it was expansion of gambling.
What expansion of gambling, would it encourage others like nonprofits and fundraising establishments to seek higher limits? And then they also discussed the need to raise revenues. The petitioners would discuss need to raise revenues and increase margins. And the commissioners would say at times, well, is that our business? Okay. And then the increase in 2006, that was actually a pretty straightforward one, because what happened was you went from $100 to $100, but some tables can be $200. Okay. And so the 200, the going to 200 straight was about the fact that actually, in fact, it was about making it clear to, you go into a card room and you know that you can bet $200 everywhere. That would make it easier for the client. It would make it easier for the establishment. It would make it easier for the gambling commission staff who has to regulate. And it knows exactly that all of these tables are 200, as opposed to some of them are 200 and some of them are 100. So that was, and then you have all the detail about the 2008, which is largely focused on expansion of gambling, as we put in our packet that we gave you last month.
So the commercial stimulant issue is new to the Gambling Commission this time.
From my extensive reading of minutes, yes.
And have we ever, I wish we had our ex officios here, because they really are the ones who should be helping us with this question of legislative intent. I mean, who knows what the legislative intent was? I mean,
Well, and Commissioner, this is where we are looking at the language of the statute as we have it today. And so that is what is before you right now.
right.
And your statute does clearly permit you at your discretion to, sorry, I just had the language here.
Your point is well taken.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've gotten a little off track going back through all this history and reviewing all of this and looking at it all, when we should just be really looking at the statute today. I think does allow us to do this.
Yeah.
Was there,
Someone's got a hand.
oh, is Bill McGregor, is your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Bill McGregor for the record. I've been with the commission for 33 years, special agent supervisor. At the risk of speaking out of turn here, one thing I wanted to be sure and point out is Commissioner Lawson, your discussion on the legislative changes and stuff regarding commercial stimulant all took place prior to House Bank card rooms being approved. And so one thing to remember is House Bank card rooms, when we added those, we added a lot of expenses to licensees in order to be able to operate those. So just for information, and when the legislature was talking about those things, the biggest activity at that time was in fact, that issue was in fact regarding to pull tabs and not not card rooms at that time. The legislature since authorized the house bank card rooms. And so hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Thank you. Any other comments, questions from commissioners?
Maybe after public comment, maybe.
Do we have to? Okay, any public comments? Anybody?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, staff, Victor Mena, and I operate the Last Frontier New Phoenix Card Rooms in the Center. This discussion has obviously gone into great depth as far as the right and the wrong of whether or not we should have a increase in wage. I think for me, it does boil down to something more simplistic. You know, it is a cost issue for the operators right now to see the wager limits go up. We haven't seen the increase in 2009, I believe. And since 2009, we have seen a decrease in the card rooms. I mean, it's apparent. So if you take a look at the graph, it does show a reduction. Part of it is because we are highly regulated. Part of it is because we do spend money on having security, surveillance, cage activities to regulate and control to keep gambling safe and honest for the public. So the statute was created in such a way to be able to afford the public to have confidence in having these operations maintain themselves correctly. So part of that cost for us is maintaining the ability to keep gambling safe and honest. It is a situation where we are seeing many, many more cost increases erode the card room industry as a whole. We're at 38, there's some pending, there's some closures. They'll continue to drop off unless we see a little bit of an increase here to be able to survive the justification of the regulatory requirements needed to operate these businesses. As far as the fact that this issue has been contentious for, well, your paperwork says 2008, 2009, we've been discussing a $500 wager limit. This is the fourth time asking for this wager limit. It's not a new discussion from that standpoint. It is a situation though where I do feel that the time might be right to see the increase. It's not an unusual limit across the country or anywhere else for that matter. So this is something that I believe would be beneficial to the industry. As well as you guys are going to be discussing here momentarily, the license fee increases of 60% going up, and they're going to go up July 1st, and that's going to be mandated across the board. You guys are looking at a decrease in pull tab licensees of 400 different licenses for the last 4 years due to post-COVID issues. Well, the reason there's 400 less licenses is because it is cumbersome to do pull tabs. It is cumbersome to operate those things profitably, to do them correctly, to do them properly and safe. So there is a cost associated with a lot of these things, okay? And we want to make sure that we're able to do things the right way. I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
I actually have a question real quick. So looking at this chart that we have, you mentioned that the number of card rooms has declined. House bank card rooms has declined since 2009 in the last increase, but that number was declining even prior to that.
Yes, and I do agree with that. I think there was a saturation of the market. So what you're seeing in that curve is a brand new industry being created and everybody coming into the industry taking a participation in that business model. What occurred is it got heavy growth and then we saw a reduction. We saw a contraction because it grew outside of its market. Essentially, the market was satisfied. And as a business person, you look at market conditions. Is the market satisfied? Can the market handle some of this activity? Your graph shows exactly the ramp up to the business, and then it shows the decrease as it's occurred.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? You did? Okay. Is there anyone online? I'm not seeing. Okay, nobody? All right. Anything else from any of the commissioners?
Yes, please. So this is not in the form of a motion, simply, I guess, for further discussion. And maybe it's a question for staff. If I believe, or just let me know if I guess if I'm accurate or not, a motion to change from 500 to 400 as for further consideration, would that be in order today? We're in the
Yeah.
process.
I mean, you can make that change. You can make a motion to change at any time.
Okay. And then, so if in fact that was moved, seconded and passed, would we, it would seem to me to be, best to then refile a new 102 at that level.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we would definitely need to refile a 102.
Okay, so then time-wise from there, where would that put us in considering this? When could it come back for final action? Ish.
Give me a minute to
Sure.
look at the code revisers, timelines. I have it here and I think. After this date.
Yes.
So the earliest you would be able to take final action would be after May 23rd, 2023. We don't have, so you could hold a special commission meeting or wait until the July meeting, which is, I'll put a plug in. It is held over an extra week, so July meeting, 20th and the 21st.
Right. All right. Okay, thank you for that. And I guess just for my fellow commissioners, I do, I mean, one other factor that hasn't been discussed as of yet is certainly, and I know increased fees was brought forward, and I think the other consideration that we ought to take into in mind or keep in mind is that the legislature passed a law or a bill that will be doubling the B&O tax for the benefit of problem gambling. So, I mean, in my mind, I think that there's, some validity in from 2009, 2023, I think it's reasonable to raise the limits to 400 so that as new fees roll out, as B&O taxes increase, I think that to the extent, and I have no idea how much additional revenue that's going to generate for house bank card rooms. But if they got a bunch of people playing at 300, they'll probably have a bunch of people playing at 400 or some portion, whatever that portion is. And I seem to recall that was, in our materials quite a while ago, a kind of estimate of that. So, if 400 is palatable versus 500, I would like to get that ball rolling so that that we can get to a final decision. But if 500 is palatable for folks, then I guess a motion to change it to 400 would probably lose or would die. And then we could continue, I guess, at 500. That, so that if I moved to change to 400, that motion wasn't adopted, then this rulemaking continues, right? Okay. So I will make a motion to change.
But before you make your motion. can you
Yes.
Say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So, you know, this commission has the authority to set wager limits. But we have a directive, a public policy directive from the legislature that says that, again, we are regulating social pastimes, which activities and social pastimes are more for amusement than for profit. And so with that, you know, I'm not blind to the economic pressures. But again, I think that the wager limits as they are currently set align with the public policy set out by the legislature in 9.46.010. And I don't see any reason to increase.
Okay, so Bud, what you're saying is you want it to be 400, not 500?
Mhm.
Is that what you want to move forward with? Okay.
I guess we'll state for the record, I am comfortable with, if it was up for final action, it was 400, I would vote yes today.
Okay, so currently what we're saying is that 500 is what's up for final action, so we would have to redo this whole process, basically.
Well, not the whole process.
We'd have to refile and then take it out another.
So what the director was saying is that you would refile the CR 102 and then final action could be taken after May 23rd.
So then we're not having a meeting in June, so it'd be July.
It would, and you can always choose to hold another, you can always hold a special commission meeting if you so chose. But then, you know, effective date is always 31 days after filing with the code revisor. So because you approve it, doesn't make it effective 31 days. It's 31 days from when we file the CR 103 code revisor.
I guess I would be fine with keeping it at the 500. Go ahead, Commissioner Patton.
You guys are ahead of me. I need clarification on something I heard earlier to help me here. I thought I heard earlier that this public policy that Commissioner Lawson is referring to was written and passed into law at a time when house bank card rooms did not exist. Is that what I heard? The intent was to, I mean, they had pull tabs. So were there card rooms in existence, legal existence at the time that this legislation was adopted? These changes were made.
So I would have to double check the legislative history, but the public policy of the state of Washington from the start of the gambling has been to keep the criminal element out of gambling and to promote the social welfare of the people by limiting the nature and scope of gambling activities. And I think that that's been consistent from the start, but if you want to hold me to that, I'd want to double check it. And so that has been since the 70s.
So the house bank card rooms were, so social card rooms were approved, not in 75, I don't recall, or excuse me, I think not in 73, but a few years thereafter.
Okay.
So social card rooms have been authorized for a long time. House bank card rooms, you go to the definition of social card game. That was amended in 97. Excuse me, social card game. That definition started in 97, but it did allow for, yeah, that's
the
the
other one.
tables for 15 tables. So, but card rooms were authorized prior to that. It's the house bank card rooms that limits of 15 tables, et cetera, that went into effect in 97.
And remember that we're looking at your statute as a whole right now. So,
The Gambling Act.
yes.
Yeah.
So that regardless of when the public policy was stated by the legislature, it is still public policy now and not frozen in time in 94. Is that what you mean?
It is still a active part of your statute, yes.
Well, I might be off base, but we're talking about intent. I mean, isn't that relevant when we try to assume what the intent of the legislature was at that particular time?
So I think legislative intent is always part of statutory interpretation. But how far and how to interpret that is sort of open to much, I'm trying to look for the right word here. Much debate sometimes. So I think what we have right now is the plain language of your statute. Yes, stop there.
I have a question about process, Madam Chair. When we move forward, would we put the motion that has been publicized on the floor, and then would Commissioner Sizemore move to amend it? Or what would the process be in order for him to have his proposal be considered today?
I think that's what Director Griffin was explaining, right?
Yes, you can go ahead and make a motion to amend,
To modify.
to modify. Yes.
But you would have to, oh, he could make, well, we have to put the motion that's been publicized on the floor in order for him to be able to amend. Is that correct?
It's an active rulemaking. I don't think that
I don't
we
know.
have to do the Senate stuff or whatever. I mean, I think that just be,
You can just put it, we can,
it would change. Yeah, this rulemaking would change from 500 to 400 if it was adopted. And then they would have to refile a new 102.
Still falls under the umbrella of the 101 that was initially filed. It wouldn't change the scope of the 101. It just,
Specific language.
Right. right.
got it. Mhm. Unless we want to have a special meeting.
Right, in June.
Would you accept a motion at this time? Madam Chair.
Sure.
I move that we modify this rulemaking of WAC 230-15-140. And rather than 500, that the single wager must not exceed $400.
Second. I think we have a second, so
Okay.
the motion is tabled. So do we have another motion?
I move to deny the petition, stating sorry, it's like reading straight verbatim, stating the reasons for denial. Oh, that's where I'm supposed to insert the reason. for denial. Okay, let me start over. I move to deny the petition, on the basis that the economic data does not support the rule change. Sorry, I'm having trouble with the language that was provided here, so I'm going back to what's in the materials. Yes, I make them, okay. Strike that. Let's start third time's a charm, guys. Withdraw the petition. I move to withdraw the petition in writing, stating the reasons for the withdrawal and specifically addressing the concerns stated in the petition, which are the, that the economics require increase in the wager limit. You guys translate that for me.
What you mean?
What I really mean, right. I move that we deny the petition that has, as petitioner has claimed in their petition. They need it for economic reasons, but in my motion, the economic reasons are not there.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you're making a motion for withdrawal of the rule. The basis for this withdrawal is that while the petitioner is asking for a wager increase based on economic reasons, based upon thorough review of the economics, you do not believe that the economics supports such a wager limit increase. And that
That's
was
correct.
long, sorry, I'm on the flood too.
Yes.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second? Okay, no second. That motion also dies.
So we're still here.
Um,
Talk about it again next month, I guess, huh?
Well,
I think that's one of the options.
I would, can I make a motion?
I can make a motion.
Or you can do final action. Other option.
This is fun.
But
I don't, Madam Chair, I don't know what we've learned today that could justify us delaying taking a vote.
I
I
agree.
mean, it's a tough vote. We've been pulled in both directions very powerfully, very effectively. It's, you know, it's like most things, a lot of things, it's, there are powerful arguments here. But I don't know that by waiting another month, it feels like we're just delaying doing the hard thing is what we're doing.
Right. And I
So
guess,
I would like to go ahead and make a motion that we move forward with, to approve the wagering limits for house bank card rooms. And it says here for final action, 31 days after filing with the code revisor's office, and direct the staff to initiate a separate rulemaking process related to problem gambling signage.
yes,
So that would be the $500 limit. Unless one of you can convince me that there's something else that we've learned today that we should spend another month studying. I'm very open to that.
And Vice Chair, my one comment would be, I think that was meant to be two separate motions. So you might want to do a motion
Okay.
first on the House Bank.
Okay,
Wager limits and then.
so let me
address-
amend my motion to take the part about rulemaking for problem gambling signage out.
it's been moved and I will second that motion. Do we have any further discussion?
I wish that my motion for 400 would have passed. I do not think that 500 is the right number. And, you know, a 60% increase in wager limits in a very established card room atmosphere, I don't believe is warranted. I believe that 400 would have provided additional gaming revenues for card rooms at a time when we are asking them to support the agency at a higher level, support problem gambling at a higher level. But I'm not comfortable with 500. I'll be voting no.
You already know my position.
I'll make a brief comment, Chair.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. The gravity of this issue is not lost to me, even though I was disappointed yesterday. I will be abstaining from this vote purely for the interest of the appearance of fairness, seeing as that there were many substantive conversations despite reviewing the voluminous tomes of data and minutes and so forth on this. At the same time, there's still no replacement for expert testimony from staff briefings and I personally do not feel comfortable making a direct decision, yay or nay, on this, just not having been there, given the gravity of this. So in the interest of the appearance of fairness of this process, I personally will be abstaining my vote.
Thank you, Commissioner
So,
Ibsen.
Madam Chair, I'd like to withdraw my motion.
Okay. Withdraw.
I didn't do the second. She has to withdraw her second.
I withdraw my second.
And I'd like to reoffer Commissioner Sizemore's previous motion to move forward with the $400 limit.
I would second that.
Question, and maybe this doesn't make any sense. No, never mind. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded for a $400 increase.
Increase to 400.
Oh, right, all right, $400. An increase to $400, okay. Any further discussion?
This sausage making is what it is.
All right, been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
And
Abstain.
we have one abstention, so the motion passes 3-1 with one abstention. So. Thank you.
Chair.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Uh,
Oh, we need another
thank-
motion.
thank-
I'm gonna give motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we direct staff to initiate a separate rulemaking process related to problem gambling signage.
Repeat that.
I'm making a motion that we direct our staff to come forward with a, asking them to initiate a separate rulemaking process.
I'm
On problem gambling.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry. Okay, go ahead with that and then I'll jump back in. Right.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded for the staff to initiate rulemaking on problem gaming. Signage, is that? what I'm
That's
hearing? Is
correct.
that correct? Okay. Any further discussion on that?
I think I appreciate the motion. I think it is a little premature or not necessarily. And I think about the discussion we've had related to problem gambling, related to this wager increase. I think that they should be delinked, and we kind of are doing that. But I'm not quite sure. It's been a few years since really we've had a good briefing on the training that's been the dealers and, you know, people that work within the card rooms get, how they're kind of, the state of the problem gambling in that industry, or, you know, with, you know, kind of across card rooms. We haven't really talked about it the last few years. I know the Problem Gambling Task Force has done some great work, and, you know, I'm still trying to digest all of the things that brought to light. I would like to maybe give ourselves a break for a couple of months before we kind of dive into this. And I know you have, you know, a time frame that you'd like to be able to do some of this stuff, but I would really like to, before we get started on that endeavor, I'd really like to hear kind of what our card room's doing. What is the training like? How are they doing with self-exclusion? All those sorts of things. I'd rather have, you know, a few more months before we have to kind of delve into that and add to staff's plate.
Doesn't this just start the process though? Wouldn't we still have time, or would this be on, because it's just totally separate?
right. It's a separate motion, and the way I was thinking about it, Commissioner Sizemore, is that initiating this rulemaking process would do exactly what you're asking for. I mean, we could tell staff that, you know, this is not a high priority, but all that information that you're interested in, I've been asking for some of that information personally, and I think they've done a lot of the background work on it. So what I hear is your concern for us overwhelming staff. what I'm hearing. So
Yep.
I just think we should very honestly ask you if this is timely or not. If this is something that you think that you could accomplish, or if it would interfere with any of the other important things we're doing.
So this would be to file the 101, and I think it is somewhat timely because we have the self-exclusion report of, the first year with the metrics. And there's, the 101 can live forever. So, or however long Suzanne starts to get antsy on. And, so there is no time limit to it. So if the requests become too voluminous, then yes, we may ask for things to be slowed down a bit.
That's fine.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded for this, to ask the staff for rulemaking on problem gambling materials
And signage.
and signage. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Now I'm going,
Chair, I'm
yes,
so sorry, just to break in and clarify, the prior motion regarding the house bank card run wager limits. May want to, I know that you discussed it before, but may want to clarify that it is to amend the language and refile the CR 102 and bring this back to the commission for final action, correct?
correct.
Okay. Just for clarity, you
Yes.
might want to do one more motion just to clear that up.
Okay, does anyone know how to do that?
So tell me what the motion needs to be so that we get it right, get the verbiage right.
So right now you are looking to amend the draft rule language to a $400 wager limit. And you are asking staff to refile the CR 102 with that draft language and bring this back to the commission for a public hearing and final action. And are you requesting a special meeting or are you discussing this at the July meeting?
Do I need to have that in the motion?
No, but that might be details staff might appreciate afterwards.
Okay. So we should probably pass the motion first and then we could talk about that detail. Is that- Okay.
Okay.
So do I need to withdraw my other motion to offer this one?
Oh wait, Bud needs to withdraw, right? Because
Excuse me.
You're
right.
I
Patterson.
thought Vice Chair Patterson made the motion,
Oh,
and so
right,
that
okay.
would be hers to withdraw.
All right, so I do withdraw that previous motion. Can I do that?
Right.
It's already been voted
Well,
on.
pass, someone who voted on the prevailing side can reconsider it.
Right. Having voted on the prevailing side, I'd like to reconsider. I'd like to reconsider the motion. Do you have to vote on that?
Again,
Vote on
I, okay.
So, yeah, they need to, what you said.
Okay, so
I can verbalize what she said.
So I
but
think that was right now your,
I moved to withdraw my
amend.
you're moving to amend your
Right.
previous motion. And then you have the language there, but that you're looking to amend it with written down,
okay.
And then
right?
have someone else.
And
second.
refile the 102.
Right.
Okay, so in that case, I need to amend the draft rule language that for a $400 wager limit. And that direct staff to refile the CR 102. And that the staff then brings that language back to the commission for consideration and a vote and filing.
and I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? You are close.
For what?
$400 limits.
The $400.
Oh.
wage.
You're back on that?
Yep.
That was just to get it. And I'll abstain as well.
I was just getting the language correct.
Yay.
Okay. So the motion passes 3-1, one opposed and one abstention. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break here. So we'll be back at 2:40.
I was just saying that when I, having voted on the prevailing side, asked to reconsider the vote that didn't have the language that you wanted, I think that there